Observation 1 is resolution analysis. The explains resolution. The United States federal government should adopt a cybersecurity strategy, increasing regulation of critical computer infrastructure to be places around. Should be evaluated through net benefits and cost plan versus benefits plan through the lens of policymaker. Observation 2 is inherency. The East West cyber attacks are growing in strength. There's been a denial of service of thousands of computers across the nation, leading to thousands of attacks and crash. However, they have now been allowed to be able to go into critical files, such as JP Morgan and Bank of America recently had an attack by which they're able to allow for a denial of service attack. However, they're not able to access the customer profiles. The Pentagon also released a report indicating that there was 10 million attacks from the context of a year period in the U.S. is probably one of the worst places. In fact, in Utah alone, it faces 20 million attacks a day. The beast was that these cyber attacks are increasing, but our defense is not. There's been a 4 times increase in 2007, and the U.S. is now focused on a detection strategy, which some analysts say is going to fail. This plan. The United States federal government, through an act of Congress, should mandate critical computer infrastructure systems implement the trusted, dynamic, logical heterogeneity system, which we'll be calling TALENT for short. The United States federal government, through an act of Congress, should mandate critical computer infrastructure systems, implement the trusted, dynamic, logical heterogeneity system, what we will call TALENT, funding enforcement vehicle on me. Do you have any questions?
You're going to explain what it is, I'm saying?
Yeah, I'll slow down insolvency.
Yeah.
Advancement of cyber attack. These ways that the U.S. is scaling to protect itself now, what the DoD recently indicated in a report that we have an insecure architecture, meaning that there needs to be a dramatic change in strategy. There's also been a report indicating that this disruption could have devastating effects on the military, food, medical, and transportation supplies. And also is primarily due to a lack of defense reports indicating that 85% means that the DoD is now tracing the ways the plan utilizes our detection system to escape the threat. Our argument is that what's how unique it does is that it jumps around when an attack is reported to that a computer will switch the operating system and also switch the IP address, meaning that the cyber attack no longer knows what's attacking. The MIT report recently indicated that platform diversity is one of the most devastating things to happen to a cybersecurity attack because the coding by which you put within the malware worm is uniquely enabled. For example, if someone wanted to hack my Mac OS system, it would go to SID's Windows operating system to a completely different program, which happens within the content of a blink of a second. MIT recently indicated it's also an inexpensive opportunity that should be allowed to fully develop. It also uses general purpose programming language, which makes it adaptable to all programs. This is one. Yeah.
Is it developed by MIT, and what stage of the development is it at?
It already exists. They've been talking to the DoD.
That MIT did tests about the system, about the effectiveness of the URL system.
Who created the system?
I mean, I don't know the guy's name. Cease point. Absent defense attacks will only lead to devastating our critical infrastructure. Our arguments that to allow for there to be devastating wars, particularly in the context of weapons storage. Also, the grid can allow for denial of service attacks to devastate the way in which electricity is able to function, proven by the White House. Also, the subsect's capability proves that other countries uniquely would be able to create model worms in the future. It also allows for reactors to be melted down and allows for stock trading to completely be eradicated, contingent upon the fact that those happen in a millisecond. The displays the impacts versus blackouts. Our arguments blackouts uniquely devastating, lead to violent riots and deaths. Arguments it kills millions because it also affects the way in which heating and cooling is able to happen and will also devastate things like perishable medicines like insulin, which allow for a million people to die. The second argument is reactors are arguments that would be equivalent to 30 Chernobyls across the United States to allow for 50 to 100 miles of radiation, which would be a devastating retaliation because the United States would have to trace where that attack would happen from. Leads to a third argument, economic collapse argument, is that the world of critical infrastructure collapse to allow for the stock trades completely collapse, allowing for millions of investment to be able to pull out the United States and allows for poverty, which kills 825,000 people a year, food aid, which affects 1.1 billion in war, which will allow for resource devastation, causes WD escalation due to the fact that they think they are already attacked in the status quo. Advanced use, patient zero. The exploit that the U.S. is heading towards tracing technology in the status quo. The ICMP is the technology that put instead the U.S. is going to use it. In a statement of the U.S. Department of Cybersecurity also said that they're currently looking at active defense with focus uniquely on China. The goal of this is to find patient zero or the origin of where the infection came from. The exploit the plan is able to solve for tracing the cyber attacks. One is we uniquely offer strategy deterrence to wait. The thing about jump arounds that other countries would uniquely know that our capabilities still outweigh theirs, that they wouldn't be able to tackle us in the first place. The second loss for transition and strategy or argument is that currently it would move away from the faded strategy of cyber attacks to that of defense, meaning that we would no longer have to implement these technology because they were replaced on the theory argument is that there's no incentive to war and attack conflict. Arguments that the administration would be able to de-escalate the way in which the discourse surrounding these cyber attacks is occurring in the status quo allows for a de-escalation of other systems and diplomatic dialogue about the ways in which all countries can make their systems safer. The fourth argument signaling it will allow other countries to be able to do things like model the way in which we're able to implement this platform technology. The U.S. can selectively choose to give its allies a strategic benefit by allowing for them to not have to deal with cyber attacks, particularly in the context of a region where it's more stable. The cease points that the DHS is uniquely key. Our first argument is that they have the jurisdiction over the way in which domestic affairs are able to happen, particularly the critical computer infrastructure. Second is that the DHS is key to prevent active defense. If the DoD is allowed to implement the forms which they said they would in 2015, that will lead to their transition to active defense. Third argument capability. Only if DHS has the critical capabilities to be able to deal with this. And Valentino recently indicated a report by which only and what would DHS business was able to absolutely have the ability to prevent things like grid shutdowns. For trust, our argument is that the DHS uniquely already has a orientation of those who are able to use critical computer infrastructure, and indicating that there's been a momentum of trust given by President Obama's executive orders. It's a question of actually putting some enforcement and technology implementation. The fifth argument is perception. Our argument is that the DHS is uniquely perceived by other international allies, particularly China, who recently indicated that if the DHS were to make a strategy change, that they would uniquely be able to resolve the tensions that exist between the two countries. Our point that cyber war is only a litmus test for conventional war. The first that the Pentagon in 2011 indicated that it was allowed to have a second strike capability in the issuance in which they had a cyber attack against them. Our argument is that there are several countries by which this could be possible against. China recently had a report which we're not able to distinguish whether or not it's coming from the government or secret agencies coming off about 100 miles away. The third argument is Iran, which has recently been calls about there being an agency within Iran who's uniquely trying to reuse Stuxnet to be able to devastate the United States federal government. The fourth argument is Russia. There is literally thousands of attacks that come from inside and out of Russia. It's the highest amount of attacks that occur every day. Our argument is that this would uniquely mean that we would have to retaliate against that region. The fifth argument is that confirmed traceability allows for us to have to attack because they would be responsible for things like the devastation of the stock market, which means there would be a public rallying cry to be able to take some sort of action. Our argument is that conflict would immediately lead to escalation, if anything. Also, the sense of conflict, given that the way in which the safety mechanisms are reduced in the world of cyber attack, means there's more impetus for general staff to do things like attack our arms and nuclear release extinction. The first argument is nuclear winter. The way in which the dust clouds escaping to the earth means it blocks out the sun's radius. This has several effects. The first, that allows for devastation of agriculture and push the inability to actually regain the plus. The second is radiation. Even though all people don't die, it would mean that it would be impossible to be able to replicate the kind of population. Also, the wind flows will particularly devastate the way in which all the industrial countries will be able to function, meaning they will be able to go into the south, and also devastate the ways in which bees are able to get their sensors, meaning they wouldn't allow for process pollination, leading to the devastation of the environment. Do you have anything else, Mike? Good.
Uniqueness first argument is the business confidence is strong in the status quo. The U.S. orders for machinery and factory goods have increased by 7.2% in January, according to the Commerce Department. And product price index has only increased by 1%, which is the smallest increase since 2011. And new joblessness claims fell by 10,000 in the third straight week. And no cyber regulation needs for businesses. No respecting legislation before the budget and immigration are passed. And investment and planning was not incorporated in new cost. The links first of the plans and meeting unexpected regulation. It makes a larger budget paid, which makes it look politically charged. And unexpected factor reinforce the concern about how pro-business Obama will be in his second term, and the plan alienates both sides of the aisle because net neutrality, support of liberalization, and regulations are always hated by the right, and the plan attacks the strongest emerging market in the U.S., which creates doubt about our ability to emerge from recession through industry. Next, as the internal links first, is piggy-making industries will use business confidence as an indicator to prevent to predict dependability and certainty of future investments, and business confidence decline, causing nominal economic decline. High business confidence is necessary to hiring, and jobs control consumer confidence. Consumer confidence is 70% of circulating money in the economy, and you take business confidence nationally because California's state budget is based on is such that any skew in the tech sector means that they would not be able to generate enough revenue for fixed costs, and the California budget crisis would reincite periods of regarding sovereignty and debt in the U.S., which magnifies the internal leaks and restore risk sequestration, which turns the U.S. into space. The U.S. subverts the economic class. You would the decline in circulating money and business investments and investment in business is likely to cause downgrades because investments don't look stable. Sequestration magnifies the problem of the internal links, which causes a decline in stability in public sentiment. Foreign investment. This means that the U.S. has several international business because the U.S. has several international businesses and 40 currencies are pegged to the U.S. dollar. Means it lowers the rate for economic class, which has already been lowered. It causes need for great power wars because economic decline reduces mutually assured destruction's ability to check, which is the only assurance for check against a large war in the status quo caused by nuclear winter. Next. The United Nations, the U.S. federal government should convene a regulatory negotiation between all vested parties and interested stakeholders in regards to mandating critical computer infrastructure systems, implement the trusted dynamic logical heterogeneity system. Again, the United States federal government should convene a regulatory negotiation between all vested parties and interested stakeholders in regards to mandating critical computer infrastructure systems, implement the trusted dynamic logical heterogeneity system. Megan will give you a copy of that in a second.
Question?
Yep. Yeah.
How long did it take when the DHS did regulatory negations last time?
We say that there is a financial incentive in order for the businesses to cooperate, so I articulate that it will take a short amount of time.
competitiveness. First is the capitalists represent the immediacy of the AFA or defense of normal means is that the plan passes immediately and is implemented without any external consultation, and the permutation fails. No solvency. No links to business confidence or garner solvency surplus because it regulates before the negotiation, and the permutation is illegitimate because it steals coordinated fair process. Capital plans are the heart of the literature race, and the government chooses between the plan and the capital plan every day. And so the plan and the capital plan. It creates a linear relationship between members of the government, businesses, and civil society, which increases knowledge and interest in regulation. And the plan allows companies to participate in drafting the regulations, which means that they perceive this as a policy is comparatively pro-business, and 90% of regulations are violated because of ignorance, not because of malice, which means that our campaign solves in a couple of ways. We teach everyone what the regulation is, and we empower civil society to help to monitor compliance, and we maintain a constant stream of communication between companies so they feel comfortable communicating with the government when they see. First, a lot of programs are not compatible between Windows and Macs, like all Linux programs, and the TPR tab program means the Crash Everyday Tournament, and you probably confuse people who use the computer infrastructure, which is who use the computers in the critical infrastructure, which means that they shut the deal voluntarily because all of a sudden you just switch the entire operating system of your computer. Also, you have to adapt computers to do this, which means that you have a long time for best, also bad design because these computers on critical infrastructure are designed to be used on factory floors by absolutely anyone, which means that there's an inherent security risk that you're either incapable of having employees do their jobs or you're incapable of protecting the computers. Also, a complete assessment of vulnerability. The Free University of Berlin was the one who did all the national assessment, which means that the hype is misguided because it has an enormous German bias, means that you're incapable of solving all vulnerability and no incentive. Status quo solves. Pentagon recruited 4,000 cyber warriors, and the president signed an order to protect U.S. critical infrastructure from hackers just 2 weeks ago, and on Advantage 2. First argument is that changing the IP address doesn't solve any of this, or the cyber investigations are capable of solving retroactively. Also, you still rely on retroactive solvency, or else you accuse people of being more likely to do hacking than others, which means that this causes government pervasive control over individuals and predicting whether or not they're going to hack. Also, two-factor authentication is being implemented on critical computer infrastructure in most states in the status quo. This solves the entirety of your app because you can see where the attacks come from. You can also not actually use the computer system unless you are physically there and receive a text to your phone that gives you a code to actually enter onto the computer. It's very problematic when I try to print things in the science library. Also, solving hacking is impossible. This draws attention to the U.S. and hackers rush in to take the challenge, and the hackers are persistent and resourceful, and it's state-sanctioned hacking, so China and Russia will just upgrade, and law enforcement lacks resources, and they can only arrest a dozen hackers a year, and hackers operate internationally, so the signal will bounce off of things like our satellites in space, and hackers are incredibly lucrative because it's big business sound industry. And next, North Korea is good about cyber terror. Next is a turn. North Korea is good at cyber terror, but is not increasing cyber attacks in the status quo. In South Korea too, 15,000 a day, including military official computers. They are deterred by uncertain U.S. regulations, and China's waiting support for them with sanctions. And the plan is basically pisses off China because it looks like we're directly responding to their threats, saying that they are a cyber hacker. This disrupts the tentative peace between Obama and Xi. Look, your Advantage 2 for the exact warrant for this. Also, North Korea cyber attacks the U.S. because they understand exactly how to thwart the U.S. security infrastructure. Plus, they believe that China will sway their side in the conflict. This turn the case. Next. This first argument is that a continuing resolution is going to pass the tax bill. The House passed a continuing resolution to fund part of the military that would be cut. Shut down with the budget didn't pass it. Democrats are investing this the CR and Senate in order to fund the social services and government occupations that would be cut. And today and tomorrow are key. Democrats and Republicans in the Senate have waited through. Amendments have agreed to limit debate today, which so the voters have in both parties see this as an opportunity to look friendly to the economy. The links first, it's a huge sweeping regulation on businesses that push Democrats in the Senate on the day that they are supposed to debate the continuing resolution. This creates a blockade in the Senate that is capable of preventing CR from passing. Pro-business, long-standing Republicans with huge war coffers will be armed twisters to lash out at the Democrats while passing your affirmative, and the Christians on the far right would have been waiting for an opportunity to lay in the grass and blame economic conditions on Obama to justify not compromising with him in the future. And socialist Republicans feel like this is a strategy of blocking all of Obama's projects and not politically tenable without a flashpoint. Like the example of the government moving too far, too fast, which is exactly what you're after. Is the internal leaks that the CR fails because Republicans lash out and arms twist moderate Republicans into voting block during the short debate. This week in the window close to the government shutdown on the 27th of March, and this and all non-essential government employees and services are shut down or furloughed. This the impacts are twofold. First, this causes a decline in the U.S. and confidence in the U.S. economy, which causes enormous amounts of capital flight and economic collapse. This not only internally linked turns the makes hacking much more likely because we look much more vulnerable in a world where we don't have the security measures or the economic means to be able to do this, but it also causes people like meat inspectors to be fired, which decreases business confidence, it decreases international trade. The entire Midwest would crash because their premise is things like livestock. Also, international markets that are dependent on our beef, like South Korea and are more likely to backlash or crash independently. This in turns advantage too. Also, they are more likely to go to things like 1 meat inspector per 1 million pounds of beef. This causes things like mad cow disease to spread. The U.S. is a huge center for zoological imports, which means that there's a huge breeding ground for disease. This causes superbug more likely to spread to a pandemic because there are enormous amounts of mutation variability. Our ability to fight disease can only be retroactive cause extinction.
Politics. BizCon. Rignig. Case.
I have a request. If you're making terms that are more complicated than do both, can I get a text of them?
Maybe.
They're like sufficiently complicated.
Yeah, I'll see what Josh can do about that.
Cool, thank you.
And I'm gonna say that we should have a new sheet before Rignig. Yeah, and then case, which is A1A2.
New sheet before we-
Correct.
Also
Are you gonna put
text
that
pictures.
on, are you gonna be on regular?
Yeah, first it's a new page and then proper.
Just make sure it's like curvy.
Yeah.
Transition if it's not.
Absolutely.
After Mike's speech goes all, I can rip them out.
I just think it's like, if it's like,
No, I hear you.
yeah.
I think you know.
I think I know what this intern's going to be. I think I have my counter intern, so it's okay.
Judges and Morgan.
Yeah.
Good. Sorry.
Politics first, and then the first argument is bombs. Executive orders would have already taken out. The new type of contingency plan to continue enrollment is going on. The second argument is Banana has already called for DoD reports as of right now about the hacks that are occurring. Specific new types of urgent action as required means independently there is a contingency plan flaw. That means that the plan looks like it's the top of the gap. But the third argument is 3 billion attacks are occurring annually. Urgency reports are already occurring as a reason as to why the government would not be able to continue to operate. Contingency plans are not going to be continue to develop. The fourth argument is cyber warrior program that you indicated on the case would probably be able to take out the entirety of the advantage and not solve the app because cyber warriors still focus on traceability. Additionally, the 5 argument is that none of these arguments are on the docket. Check GovTrack arguments is independently the very resolutions that will be on this week are only a bill to be able to sponsor these types of money going to veterans and a federal appropriation for being able to use White House lands or a botched car derby next week, which means that you do not have a warrant as to why any of these types of arguments are on the docket. Additionally, the next argument is on the link level. The first argument is no link. FIA would take out the link. Our interpretation of FIA is that FIA happens immediately means there's no time for the Democrats to get pissed about them not having the hearing date for their argument. Their link argument is only specific about the Democrats not getting the time to have a continuing enrollment debate, which means the plan would be able to solve the back. Additionally, the next argument is military ideological means independently Democrats are already predisposed to be able to vote for this legislation, the new coming legislation that would already be occurring in the status quo means that they would already be backlash. Additionally, the next argument is turn the plans that's necessary to concrete the agenda. This means independently winners would win. Our argument says this would be able to give the new stop the coalition of the base that's going on in the Democrats right now. Stopping the splittering means that they're able to come along on a single issue. Additionally, the next argument is turn the cost of the plan is less than the cost of the backlash means political cost independently would be able to be ratified in the world. And once the Democrats actually backlash against the plan, they wouldn't be able to seem like they're comprehensible in the future. They would actually lose more types of elections and funding complex, which means that they have an incentive not to backlash against the plan. Additionally, the next argument is turn losers win in a role in which it looks like the Democrats lose out on this piece of legislation. They have an incentive to be able to rally harder for new types of piece of legislation, which is why they would have more cooperation. Additionally, on the next argument is no, our capital flight is absolutely inevitable in the world where cyber attacks are occurring. You can see the argument from the advantage. It says massive investments occurring in the United States means that the plan is trying to additionally next argument is plan to be able to appease Russia because we have corporations with cybersecurity yes right now, which means the plan solves terminal impact. BizCon. First, what I want you to do is extend the following 498 arguments I read on the contingency plan of the continuing enrollment. These are all arguments specifically. That's why there would have been the perceptual environment that the United States is going to solve in cybersecurity. Specifically, Obama's executive order, Pernet's report, the 3 billion tax annually, and the cyber warriors program that read on the case are all indicative scenarios that Obama's already taken action where the perception of the advantage already occurred, but that would not be enough to be able to solve that case because it's only perceptual, and that still means that tracing is occurring within the status quo means that it can't rectify any of the advantages. Additionally, the next argument is you're just running by new types of business confidence. The CEO confidence board secrecy 18 points after the United States
States passed new type of sequester legislation because they feel like the lesser business partners means the businesses are less likely to cooperate with the United States. This is also a damning solvency argument to your regulatory condition because the government looks unpredictable. Additionally, next argument is businesses are losing over $1 trillion a year toward new cybersecurity attacks. They're rallying for new types of legislation like the plan. Additionally, next argument is linked term will be able to solve the concretion of the agenda. The reason why businesses don't like the plan is because the government has been able to take a firm stance to miscalculative uncertainty in the behaviors. Why they're losing money because the plan confirms the new type of agenda that Obama said in his executive orders. Next argument is turn the plan. The businesses are calling for new types of regulations already, specifically because they understand this is a pro-business solution created by businesses for businesses. They would be able to diversify their new types of cost-competitive computer infrastructure. They'd be able to solve back for new types of energy complications. Next argument is turn the plan is absolutely necessary to solve back for new types of computer confidence. The businesses are increasing their legalese efforts right now to be able to not have to get in legal battles with the consumers because they fear that if they don't continue to provide their service, that there will be new types of legal battles. Means the plan ameliorates those concerns. Necessary to turn the plan will be able to solve back new types of investor confidence, understand new type of predictability in the market. The business will continue to exist after government strategy means we're able to solve this back comparatively better. Additionally, regulating decreases the amount of government unpredictability because businesses feel like they would just increase regulations in the future without a warning. That's why they're doing it. Additionally, no impact to your argument. The stock market has a trigger, which means independently it would just start off before a certain level of stocks are lost in the day. This means that the only feasible scenario for economic collapse comes in a world where cyber attacks are able to turn off the stocks before they are able to shut down. Means independently the stock market has a rational response of your type of regulation, but does not have a rational response in cyber security conduct. It's the interpretation that gets one of the obviously the SESCO, then it gets one of the obviously the SESCO. The beats point is they violate its interpretation and the standards. First argument, go back to our bubbles means that it's used against you with the key speech for offensive clarity debate. Additionally, it's comparatively worse in topic area because the new types of clarity the EMO gets means they have a better knowledge of the position and that encourages these types of validity debating. The second argument, consistency and parley. There is no crowd evidence cross-sects or fallings means that it encourages these types of validity debating. This means the argument consistency is absolutely critical in the EMG that decreases clarity in debate because the contrary persistence consistently is worse in topic areas because the EMO gets to test all the types of areas. They've had 3 weeks to be able to out. Additionally, this incentivizes splitting debate because their automatic assumption that the judge already knows the very type of topic area research they're doing, which means they can get away with things like only reading counterclaim text and be able to say that the judge can fill the gaps where that means independently topic area conditionality is completely worse than these one. This is made prior order for competitive equity and education. The second argument is conditionality party kits and negative social side bias, but inevitably collapses debate, which we see as bad, and additionally collapse debate outweighs any internal benefits to debate this route. The third argument is conditionality absolves the self or the moral guilt of having to kick out of impact means independently we just wash our hands of the guilt and never actually have to recognize the way that systemic violence occurs in the interim. The first argument is permutation due to the plan, and permutation due to the plan to consult businesses in all other areas. Permutation due to the plan to consult businesses in all other areas. This would have no benefit in interoperability. Understanding that businesses understand that the plan needs to be occurring at a time when the action means independently. They understand that the United States government unilateral elections are comparatively better. They would be able to consult with government on all the issues they deem necessary. Additionally, the swamps length the entirety of the distance. It looks like the government is adopting a new type of pro-business stance. Would be able to solve politics and it's able to solve business complications, new type of predictability in the market. Additionally, the DoD would be overstretched. Means there's an increased risk for the businesses not to be able to attack. Additionally, the second argument is it doesn't solve back for any of the The first argument is that waters down the blame when you have legislation because businesses feel like the government would have control uniquely of their infrastructure. This would water down legislation to have a pro-business solution that would not be prepared for the government infrastructure or attacks that are coming against SESCO. The next argument is government the businesses want tracing, which means that you wouldn't be able to solve back for any of the others too. It makes war absolutely inevitable. Additionally, you're not able to solve because you avoid the authority of the DHS means that you get rid of all the prior infrastructure, the software, and the crowdsourcing ability, which means that businesses take lead and are able to trace new types of foreign agencies. Additionally, the next argument is turning linked to the discount. It looks like the government is actually forcing a new type of fear of regulations if you don't comply with all the government standards, means that you would actually increase the risk of business confidence, and it's an unprecedented action from the United States federal government. Means that independently you increase uncertainty in the market, and the second argument is businesses would also have an incentive to think this would be constant in the future, which is why they have an incentive to actually decrease their cooperation with the government in the future. That is whether there's another the permutation. Additionally, next argument is turn you heard international relations in a world where China is rallying against the United States right now. They would think that the United States is comparatively more unstable in a world in which they have businesses take agreements, which means that there's a propensity to increase new types of cyber attacks in the media, and it takes nearly 15 years to cooperate with business cyber. First argument, you say you would be able to confuse you or continue to solve the argument says why we are able to create any type of technology that would solve that for the distinction of nearly 100 miles, which means we're able to solve that for the non-state actors that are creating China as right now. You say that we would be able to adopt the computers. This is already a proposed business solution. The counterplay will link to this comparatively more because businesses do not want to do that. Additionally, this means that now is absolutely critical because they have proposed that it's cost competitive. They would be able to want to adopt their computers, and this is already previous infrastructure. You say that individuals can do this. In fact, floors not to have a critical computer infrastructure. We're talking about that is base level security clearance. Additionally, you say there's German bias does not matter. Our reports are coming from the DoD and DHS, and the reports and created studies by MIT, which means that no international perception. You say SESCO solves this argument. That only takes the link out to the DSAP, but it's not able to solve after the tracing that's going on in SESCO. Cyber worries only increases after tracing routines, and it should lead to an inevitable war scenario in the SESCO unless we revert from it. Patient zero. You say signal sovereignty against we still accuse people of that, and we would not have the technology to do that when Genes were able to solve that for the entire arguments about the government reverse control. Additionally, on the North Korea argument, you say that this would be centered actually, that is links to the status quo because the cyber war is increased. You talk about it, and turn, you can send the concretion of the agenda argument specifically because the only reason North Korea has got about the United States right now is because they think that we've taken an uncertain action. We are able to stabilize that agenda means that we're able to cooperate with UN agreements, and China's already signed on UN agreements in 6 years. North Korea means it's probably inevitable. Additionally, on their hackers argument, this is only providing a brink to the affirmative. If hackers are increasing it right now, and they're really good, we need defensive strategies rather than offensive strategies. The app is try or die.
Do you need me to write down any of those?
Can you write down the communication?
Of course.
Is it okay if I wait till they get back and you just send it for your knowledge? The order is going to be politics, advantage 1, advantage 2, BizCon, conditionality, and time plan.
So politics, advantages, BizCon, condo.
Sorry, I want BizCon on bottom. Politics, advantage 1, advantage 2, condo, counterplan, BizCon.
Pretty simple.
Thank you.
My writing's sketch scratch.
That's okay.
Alright, can you give me the order just because that's the
Yeah, sorry. Politics,
Mm-hmm.
advantage 1, advantage 2, condo, counterplan, disadvantage.
This con?
Yes.
Bottom?
What is this with this at? The way I label my papers is very dependent on my mood. Okay, everyone good? First, the positive is anticipated makes these that turns out to be argument to their office. The first thing that makes the boss executive order and independent comments would have triggered this. This is true because of what happened before. The continuing resolution talks means you don't get any unique evidence or this impact. The next thing the next thing makes this happen today, which means it would stall the next conversation that can't happen because of the backlash and the political response will happen, which distract focus, which means the continuing resolution wouldn't be able to pass, which wouldn't be able to pass in time to go to the other Senate. This means they're not able to generate any impact of this. Furthermore, if they win any risk of the link, they are their own arguments about them being able to turn into the economy. This means it's not going to be able to disadvantage. We're going to be controlled strongly. Linking the disadvantage out of the disadvantage is going to be able to wait this. Advantage 1. You think that you're capable of solving extinction and solving for and just solving for non-state actors. This is true in a world in which Katie's telling you that the ways in which the United States currently has cyber warriors specifically designed to do these things means we're capable of creating the forces that are going to respond to this. These forces are resource-based, which means they're going to find the best solutions to respond to the current attacks that are happening. So it's going to be more predictive solvency or the future, which means status quo solving for the same time. Next, you then across by this means no solvency. This means no solvency for advantage 1, advantage 2. I'm going to start with hackers. You're there for the hackers argument. Isn't this right? Uniqueness to your scenario. This is true in a world in which we're seeing that the way in which hackers function in the status quo means that you're never capable of subverting them because they simply are too many of them and they have too much technology and infrastructure and incentive to try to develop more technology. Generally, this first argument says that they're incredibly persistent. They look at the United States action as a test, a challenge in order for them to be able to break because the logical mindset of the hackers exist. This is a logical challenge, which means they're going to create incentives for them to try to figure out a way to sort of balance that signals off of different things.
let me see if I understand this. You're saying that China hasn't intended to attack the United States just because we point them and say you're a cyber attacker.
And because we're developing a technology that makes their tech irrelevant.
Why would they care about their tech being irrelevant if the United States just had like this awesome cyber Arnold Schwarzenegger program?
Next, I'm going to go back to the turn.
Incentives.
The next argument is proliferation of cyber technology. We are taking this occupied the same logic as the turn technology that's successful with nice and built up more weapons of mass destruction, such as like United States missile defense. But we say it's a defensive system, but it's simply responsible to create bigger weapons to subvert the defenses. This is exactly what's going to happen with cyber technology. China thinks that their military readiness isn't up to the capacity that it should be, which means that they're going to do, which means they're going to cause a buildup, which will increase the propensity for cyber attacks because more technology gets into the world. Additionality? More questions or no? Counter-interpretation? The negative team gets one conditional advocacy. The negative team gets one conditional advocacy that is based in net benefits. The first argument, one conditional advocacy, that's the extended interpretation. First argument is that none of your, first argument, this is always going to be best for education. The aim of points for reward plus fixed decide to me whether to not do anything or to do something with the world status quo. In addition, this is the key to be able to understand the way we tend to do nothing. The status quo policies are capable of functioning, which allows us to research current practices. The next argument is fairness. The negative team should, the next thing that's going to be fairness. The negative team is lost to what adds means that the affirmative women have disadvantaged the counterplan and not further the blinks beneficial. This puts burdens on the affirmative negative team. It doesn't allow for any fairness within the debate, which results in left debate. Using back to rebuttal solves, articulating the only internal link to this, and being able to forward to arguments in MPT. Of course, we would have words and arguments next to me making the clarity. And I had 2 more research degrees in the rebuttals. You should be able to research your active and against multiple things until the increase research for both sides. In addition, only having one advocacy means then we have to do the most particular advocacy, which means the MG gets more prep than the MO. Just choose fairness, the cost of living, big cost of living, educational debate, is the internal link, competitive. I also don't vote on potential abuse, only vote on real bad abuse. They don't make any articulation about how the impact how the violation deserve to happen. We're kicking out the counterplan in the case. Then they don't think the world status quo causes empty time trade off the counter with potentiality. This means that there's no reason to vote here. We're suggesting the argument of the team. Don't let's get the counterplan. Counterplan classifies orientation. Disadvantage. Uniqueness. Using the box open and even as actions capable are show the business confidence the actual confidence speakers and says
No, this one?
what? Yeah, sorry, this one. I will slow down. I would class arguments that say that given specific analysis of how manufacturing sectors as well as jobless claims are decreasing, this is the most predictive analysis of what businesses are going to be able to do because it shows that they're investing money in current technologies to increase durable goods. Our manufacturing statistics are specific to durable goods, which means that they show businesses are investing in the future. In addition, the jobless claims show that they're investing in hiring more people, investing in new projects. We say that they're investing in projects in Obama, and so with banana industry can link to this. It's true because it was a specific type of play out. It didn't have specific insights, specific management. What he has with the specific play text, which specific play text means that you would be which the trigger link. We say that this is specifically triggers the link to the disadvantage because the time frame that it happens in the middle of different negotiations about continuing resolution and other things, which means that it's not received. Next, you say this down 8 points after sequestration. Look, the confidence points are not predicted in the future. The way the businesses are invested, which is our makes is more predictive. You go with it. Next, you see the government looking unpredictable with losing. This doesn't make the look. We're saying advocating for the status quo, which the government looks like taking the strong cybersecurity stance, incentivizing but doesn't incentivize this program, which in the case the development of industry by the private sector, because the mandates of which means that their funding investments can be diversified. Next, on the links. Using the plan defines the ways in which cybersecurity is capable of being enacted. This is true because like this unsolicited regulation, which makes business considered the bonds would be pro-regulation within the world species of other entities. Next, you see term and confidence is called for new regulations. Call for new regulations. They're not called for new regulations. World says well, businesses don't like regulations. They respond to bring cybersecurity act. The probably shows us. We're giving more specific analysis. Next, you say also the time frame which you're linking to the call for regulations. Next, you say turn the complexity of confidence because of legal battles. This turn doesn't work. The reason the business confidence
I didn't mean to interrupt you, I just, did
Oh,
did
that's-
the order change?
Yes, you're fine. I'm sorry. I should have been more clear. You should interrupt me in the future if I do
I
that.
just want to make sure I'm not understood.
No, I appreciate that.
Okay. Yeah, it's just impact stuff. We're gonna start on, I guess, advantage 2 or this ad. It's, I don't really know how you float the yellow wire.
Probably a new sheet of paper, I think, for the silver. Straight down. I'm gonna flip one.
Okay, is everybody ready?
Yep.
Risk is a function of magnitude times probability, where probability is determined by the strength of your solvency and your empirical consistency. Unfortunately, I don't think that the affirmative is winning the question of solvency strength in this instance, which means that the probability of their scenario is very low. Even if they win a 100% claim to magnitude, they will still win very low probability of being able to actually solve the scenario that they isolate, which indicates that you should not be voted and you should not be evaluating the case with very high risk. This means that a 1% risk of a link to the dissat will independently outweigh any risk of offense coming off the 1AC. Because they, or a risk of a link. Okay. Starting on the dissat impacts. There are 2 conceded impacts on the level of the dissat. I don't know why Mike doesn't even read a link of impactee on this sheet of paper. This is probably a problem for him, especially when you are conceding an extinction level disease scenario that has no defense on it. This is high probability because it goes conceded. It also is something that we are incapable of dealing with in the status quo. Whereas we have cyber warriors and all sorts of status quo, we have all sorts of arguments that say that the status quo would solve things like 2-factor authentication, things like cyber warriors, all sorts of tech defense in the status quo that is currently that is currently preventing the cyber war that you're advantage to isolates as inevitable. But however, we are incapable of solving things like superbugs. We can only solve disease retroactively, which indicates that we are less prepared to deal with this impact, which means that you should evaluate it at a higher priority. We should try to avoid something that we are less prepared to deal with. Additionally, we say that the technology and funding will necessarily trade off in a world of the 1AC, especially if we will not be able to deal with disease. We will not be able to deal with things like cybersecurity in worlds where we have to spend all of our money to research how to solve a superbug, which means that we can never have security in a world of the dissat or international relations, because guess what? The countries that we will probably try to be negotiating with to get out to prevent the cyber war, to prevent your impact scenario from reaching terminalization, those people will probably not meet with us because our people would be sick. This independently outweighs the app. It is a conceded extinction level scenario, a conceded pandemic. Yes, outweighs your app. I don't know why you concede extinction. Economic collapse. You also concede an argument that says that economic collapse causes great power wars. This escalates to the level of the on a faster time frame than the conflict scenario that you isolate on advantage 2, because Russia is immediately affected by the instability of our beef market. That is articulated very, very specifically on our impact scenario, that the instability in our beef market causes Russia to immediately backlash on trade negotiations with us. There's also a larger risk of escalation because the international market, it becomes a question of whether or not they should continue to invest in the U.S. This means that the link of the dissat is actively triggered versus a passive impact that happens via your app. Your app is passively causal at best, which is the argument that you were giving about how this is try or die. Try or die scenarios indicate that this is not necessarily going to happen, that your app is not reverse causal, that you cannot prove a causal link chain, that you cannot prove that your 1AC action is capable of resolving the conflict of your affirmative. This means that anything could trigger the app just as anything could solve the app. Your 1AC action is not necessary to solve advantage 2. There is enormous amounts of estimated uncertainty. However, you concede a risk of a link on the dissat, which means that the dissat will actively be triggered by the instance of the affirmative, which means that there is proof of causal link. This independently outweighs the likelihood of your affirmative. Also, your affirmative, which means that we should prefer to prevent actively triggered links versus passively caused impacts, because you have an instance where you could have something not happen versus have something that you could potentially solve later. When you are actively preventing harm from happening, that is preferable than passively stopping something from happening via the 1AC. Also, the only advantage scenario that you can go for is a war scenario. However, your time frame is either long or inevitable. You only risk likely increase through the U.S. proving an incentive for hackers. That is the North Korea argument that we are giving. This scenario is very clear. Your plan looks like the U.S. is slapping its chest and saying, "Come at me, bro." That is only a likelihood of increasing the incentive for war, the incentive for conflict, the incentive for a shorter time frame to your impact, which means you internally link to your app.
The order is politics. advantage 1, advantage 2. And then business confidence is set. There will be a short overview which you should feel free to flow on top politics. Morgan? Mike? Register.
The ballot will say it was try or die for SIU. Absent a counterplan, cyber warriors will use offensive strategies, which causes international conflagration faster than you can imagine. Only the plan stops by leading a transition away from cyber blame games and allowing for us to have effective defense, which means none of your dissents will matter. Politics. You don't really kick out of this properly, considering that there's impact defense against your Russia scenario. You've conceded that only the plan would be able to solve relations. If you remember, that is Mike's last argument on this flow circle, and star that argument. It indicates that we'd be able to solve for relations, which means even if an economic decline happens, nations will remain resilient. Solves the impact to your argument. Go to advantage 1. You don't get here for enough time, and we make a pretty good nuance between what the status quo is. The status quo means cyber warriors will come, and they do not solve any RF because we indict them. We indicate that they will use offensive strategies. What they try to do is find where the attack is coming, and then they will bomb them because we have to retaliate, indicating that it's try or die for the affirmative. However, this does not unique your dissent because it indicates that the DoD will already have a perception that businesses will have to adopt what the cyber warriors want, indicating that it's try or die. The impact outweighs and turns the entirety of your argument. There can be a stock trigger and the world of economic collapse, but you cannot have a stock trigger for a world of massive blackouts and nuclear radiation causes devastation of the environment, which is larger magnitude because we cannot adapt to that argument. Go to advantage 2. You say that hackers would be able to subvert, not specific to any of our technology arguments, indicating that MIT already indicated that we would be able to deter those attacks. You also conceded the interoperability argument, indicating that we would jump between systems, indicating that the way in which worms work in the status quo is not able to do that. You should prefer our argument on the evidence comparison here. They just say hackers can do whatever they want. There's not a war, and moreover, we would be able to solve through international treaties. You've conceded the argument that the U.S. would be able to work with China on UN treaties, indicating that that would reduce the amount that hackers exist in the status quo. Solves your state organization argument. Your backlash argument is ridiculous. China would have already linked to the status quo. Cross-apply the cyber warriors analysis. If they think that we literally are going to send Terminator against them, they probably would have backlash with North Korea before. You say hacking is lucrative. We solve that issue. China gets on board because they also lose money due to attacks. You say North Korea and China. There are several non-uniques versus cyber warriors, and also the fact that Paneta's been slamming them in interviews. Only we are able to concrete the agenda by preventing retaliation because China indicates that we shifted to defense, not trying to bomb them. Solves the entirety of your argument. Go to BizCon. This debate is rather simple. The link that they try to go for is extremely tenuous, and they only say that manufacturing is high. We have a couple arguments why that industry would have been effective. The first is that they're sent across that they're losing $3 billion in the status quo, indicating that if you wanted to invest in technology, it probably looks shady, and a world where cyber attacks are occurring. The second argument, the cyber warriors, this is a devastating uniqueness to take out because it indicates that it's something that the DoD said they were going to do, not something that has already occurred, which is all your only argument is against our uniqueness. Ours is predictive, indicating that businesses was already freaked out because of how generic your links are, because they wouldn't perceive cyber warriors or probably be a big government trying to regulate. Moreover, on the link debate, we do not trigger any of these links. You can extend across 2 reasons we solve confidence. The first is CEOs. You can see that they've already decreased their confidence due to sequester. Your uniqueness on politics probably proves our argument. The U.S. couldn't get its crap together, indicating that the CEO confidence is more predictive of the future. You say it's not a war. The confidence is based off of they ask you the question, do you think the U.S. market will be good in 5 years? That's how the report is. Obviously, long-term. Moreover, our second argument is that we indicate that only businesses love the plan precisely because the shift to defense means that there's a collaboration. You can see the DHS link here, which indicated that they've already had experience with them, which means there's no threshold to your argument. You say we would decrease the program. Calling baloney. Businesses want this regulation. They don't have a program in the status quo. That's why they've been losing $3 billion. Probably a reason only the plan is effective. You say the businesses won't like it. However, the plan is critical to international confidence. Mike is right on this illegal battles. We would be able to solve why illegal battles occur in the status quo, because what happens is that when people lose their money, they blame the businesses. We would resolve the issue because businesses would no longer use money in a world where we protect them. Solving that legal, that is the link to the status quo. Try or die for the affirmative. Moreover, you can see we solve for investor confidence because they are scared of the risk of attacks in the status quo. In a world where they knew that the United States de-escalated the conflicts between U.S. and China, they'd be able to solve that. You say that you would decrease investment in durable goods. Our link turn solves that. You try to say this is a fast crash. However, we have a comparison argument here. Stock market has a trigger Financial crises don't occur because they shut that off. 2008 proves, however, a cyber attack kills the trigger, which means it wouldn't exist.
They have one blip argument that says investment, not stock market.
They may have one blip argument that means investment, not stock markets. Investments occur on the stock market. Like, your 401k goes straight to New York. This is a gut check argument. Only in a world where we have offense in the status quo would we have programs that are completely ineffective. All of the uniqueness arguments are indicative of why it's try or die. Kicking out of the counterplan is actually a bad idea at the end of this debate. It's the reason why I said you will win.